We all know how the Civil War started. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor. Less than 34 hours later, the Union forces at the fort surrendered. A great victory for the Confederate Army. Eventually, the war ended in the year 1865 with the surrender of the Confederate Army. Or did it? In 1863, Stonewall Jackson was wounded by friendly fire in Virginia. He later had his arm amputated and eventually died of complications from pneumonia. Well, that is what they want you to believe. In 1863, Stonewall Jackson felt like the tide of the war was turning, and the Union Army would begin to push back the Confederate forces. Jackson decided to seek out a dark necromancer in the hills of Virginia. He asked the necromancer what could he do to have the power to ensure victory for the Confederate Army. The necromancer instructed Jackson that he would have to sacrifice his life by dying at the hands of those that served him. Then, he would have the power he desired. Jackson returned to his troops and spoke to those that were closest to him. 3 of Stonewall Jackson's soldiers volunteered for the task at hand. They opened fire, and Jackson was wounded, but still alive. The necromancer appeared to Jackson and gave him further instructions. The necromancer said, "Stonewall Jackson, you and all those that have laid up their lives for the Confederacy shall be entombed in a large granite rock in the state of Georgia. If the Confederacy is defeated, you will rise again once 110 years have passed. A great and powerful army will rise from under the granite rock. It will be an immortal, undefeatable army of the undead. Many soldiers that perished in the Civil War were given false grave sites for their loved ones to mourn at. But in secret, they were being entombed in the large granite rock. Thousands of soldiers would lay in wait for their time to rise for the Confederacy. Word spread of this dark plan to some members of the Union Army. Most thought it was preposterous and an old wives' tale. General Sherman, a leader of the Union Army, heard reports of the plan set in motion by Stonewall Jackson. Not knowing if it was true or not, he decided to destroy as much of the state of Georgia as he could. This was known as Sherman's March to the Sea. He and his soldiers destroyed all they could along his path. They even burned down the city of Atlanta, hoping to stop any evil from rising against the Union Army. Once Atlanta burned, the few Confederate soldiers that knew the secret of the granite rock sealed the tomb and left. The Confederate Army in 1865 surrendered to the Union Army, and the war was over. For now. The process of healing the nation had begun. Many years passed, and much was forgotten except for a small secret society of those who held the belief that the South would rise again. They would meet at the granite rock, known to us today as Stone Mountain. Some believed that they should wait for the time when the undead army would arise and join them in taking back their Confederacy. Some members of the society rebelled against this darkness. They were cast out and told not to return. A great wizard of the outcasts spent many years devising a plan to keep the undead army from ever rising again. After much research, he concluded a protective ward would guard the mountain in the form of a carving. The carving would be of 3 great leaders of the Confederacy: Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. Many asked the great wizard why this must be. He stated that those in the mountain would be in a peaceful rest if their great leaders were there to watch over them. The wizard died soon after the work on the carving had commenced in 1915. The carving was completed in 1972, 3 years before the time when the undead army would rise. By this time, only a handful of people in the secret society were still alive. They knew of the story and the real reason for the carving in Stone Mountain, but to them, it had gone from truth to story to legend to a myth. There have been many critics of the carving since its completion. Some groups have risen and called for it to be removed, calling it a stain on a geological wonder. If they only knew what hell would be unleashed if they did remove the carving. But it is all just a myth. Or is it? Maybe it's just a coincidence we use granite for our gravestones and other cemetery monuments.